Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with a focus on building both legacy and leverage. I'm Evan Mack, and today's episode is all about something you won't find in the HUD handbook. That's credibility. From how your team communicates to how your legal posture is perceived, there's a quiet variable that influences whether your deal crosses the finish line. This is the quiet variable, how credibility shapes HUD approvals and closing. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Hey, Evan. Good day, good morning, afternoon, whatever it is. I don't know where I am.
Good morrow. What did they say? Oh my gosh. Let's start with what most people miss. How exactly does credibility shape the outcome of a HUD deal, and why do strong numbers alone not always cut it, sir?
Well, Evan, it's kind of like credibility in real life. Not that HUD isn't real life, but just in any facet of life, what you say you are and what you say you do, you want that to be true, and you want that to mirror and be aligned in all facets of your life. I think in the context of what we do, context of HUD deals, one of the biggest things that I'm constantly looking for, badgering, haranguing, harassing, preaching, whatever to clients and to any would-be clients or would-be folks who are interested in this type of work is whatever is there, whatever you say is there, just make sure that that's the case. So we're not trying to sell a bill of goods. We're not quacks. We're not, selling things that aren't true. We just simply want what's on the printed page to actually be verifiable, true, and something that we can put forward in a manner that makes sense. Now, I always say, take it or leave it, but I always say, we're not going to invent things out of whole cloth. So if you have $1 million as opposed to $100 million, let's not say you have $100 million, because at some point you're going to have to show what you have. You're going to have to show where does that live? Where does that exist? If you say you don't have other partners or other investors, but you actually do, then obviously we want to make sure that that's part of what's being presented. So I think in the broadest possible sense, credibility is all about just simply saying, just simply being who you say you are, and we want to prove that and show that that authenticity throughout the entire process.
All right, but what are some of the earliest credibility killers that you see? Especially from newer development teams.
So I'll give you I'll go through the files or the annals of recent history. When clients come and they say, we've done this before, but there is no evidence that you've done it before. So in the case that I'm thinking of, there's an instance where a developer said, hey, we've acquired a HUD property before. Now they had, but they had not done it in the lead role. So there was really no documentation of them being in the lead role, so that someone underwrote them, so that there's actually paperwork buttressing that. And so while you may be able to speak in broad terms, or while they may have been able to speak in broad terms about the thing, it does not then prove in a real sense that they actually had done a deal. So in the minds of the HUD bureaucrat or the HUD attorneys who are looking at this, in their minds, no, you haven't done it. Same thing with management companies. So usually these sorts of things require some sort of professional management. And you always want to look for some matrix of experience, right? So if you've got an experienced owner, you can tolerate a less experienced management company. If you've got an experienced management company, you can tolerate a less experienced owner. So some mix of that. If you say, yeah, we've managed all these properties before, but they're duplexes and fourplexes and eightplexes, and not necessarily a 200 unit or a 250 unit HUD property. Well, in their minds, the government's minds, that's not analogous experience. So I've seen this cut in ways where you may think, or a client or a developer might think it's one thing, really trying to oversell where they are in the process. And when the rubber and the proverbial road meet, that's really not the case. So I'm always saying, let's under promise and over deliver. So we might go
Mm.
in and say, hey, I've done real estate work before. I've even done multifamily real estate work before. I've just never done it in this context. So almost like seeking to understand and helping them guide you along. That always cuts much better than someone who says, yeah, I played with Jordan. I was on the team back in the day. Well,
Yeah,
you may have been the
yeah.
12th man on the bench. You never saw the court. You may have been in the arena. You never saw the court.
That's so true though, man. How many stories I heard like that? Yeah, he went to my school. I'm like, oh, okay. That's a big school, man.
Hey, my third cousin? She actually dated.
I swear I've heard that story. That's so crazy. My third cousin twice removed. Oh my God.
Exactly. Exactly.
but, but Terry, so in your experience, though, what subtle red flags in tone, language, or even timing raise eyebrows for HUD reviewers before they even open the financials?
this sounds this sounds so basic, Evan. Lack of responsiveness. So
Hmm.
usually when a transaction is pending and it's in the clutches of the government,
Hmm.
we want to move these things. And I'm thinking about someone on our staff here internally. She laughs probably when I say this, but we want to move with alacrity. It sounds like, what the heck are you talking about? But we always want to keep these things moving. And the
Right.
reason is, obviously people get busy. The life of a bureaucrat can sometimes bog down. What we
Mm,
normally see is when we're asking for things, and if a client or a developer is not being responsive to what is being requested, it is an indication that something probably is a little off. And if that thing is a little off, then it's going to lead to deeper and further questions. Sometimes it's just better to, do the thing, give the thing, get the thing, and keep moving forward so that there will be less questions. The other thing I'll say is when you're proposing, or, I'm saying you euphemistically, right? But when a structure is being proposed, that is so convoluted and so complicated and so sophisticated where it literally takes a law degree, a CPA, and 5 years of experience post those things to really figure out where the money is flowing. That raises flags also, and it leads then to a question, to the credibility point. Well, what are you trying to hide?
mm,
So someone's got to be on the hook for this thing. Who is that going to be? And why are you intentionally trying to obfuscate where that is or who that is? Now, I'll say
mm,
the other thing too is when we see borrowers or clients or developers who come talk to our firm, if there's a reluctance to really shield their financials, for me, that's always like, okay, so you're not buying a car here, right? It's not like we're going down to the local Toyota dealership and buying a $35,000 car. We're
mhm.
buying a multi-million dollar apartment building that there's going to be some sort of financial stringency or some sort of requirements necessary to do this thing.
Yeah.
If you are saying, if you're saying to your attorney, let alone to the government, I don't want to give those financials, I don't want to supply that. Okay. There's usually some red flag. There's usually something lurking there.
Mm,
And it does reveal itself pretty early on in the process.
mm.
Yeah.
Terry, can you share a real world example of a deal that checked every technical box, but stalled out because of what the team, what team was perceived?
Um, well, I'll just give you an amalgamated, sort of global example that I've seen in multiple contexts. So I just hinted about the financial piece, right?
Yep.
So we've had in many instances where people have come in and they've said, "Hey, we want to do this deal that's under contract. We heard about you guys, Terry. You're supposed to be the guy, so let's do this thing." And then I start asking, "Okay, well, who's behind the deal?" And they'll say something like, "Well, we've got a fund." I'm like, "That's great. I'm glad you got a fund." But like, who's the warm body? Who's the person? Who's the natural
Mhm.
person who's going to speak for this thing? And I have seen so many instances where people would actually say, or do I have actually said, we're gonna give you the funds balance sheet, and we're going to give you the funds thing, or we're going to give you the funds whatever. And I'm like, okay, this is all wonderful, fine and dandy, but
Mm-hmm.
until you, avatar person of the fund, until you actually tell me what your personal experience is and your financial standing, just to be liquid. Because at the end of the day, what I'm getting at is they want someone to hold responsible if anything goes wrong. And yes, the entity ultimately will be responsible, but if they're going to sue someone and send someone papers, they need to know that they're sending it to Evan or Terry or whomever, not
Mm-hmm.
to some random PO box someplace that has, some corporate, entity that no one even knows. Someone has to stand behind the deal. So we've seen so many instances where on paper the fund or these entities, they look wonderful, but there's a reluctance again to shield a person. Now sometimes it's simply because people are private and they just don't want their information to be divulged in that way. But I got
Right.
a news flash for you. You're asking for public money in some way, shape, or form. Anything you do with the government can be FOIA, meaning it can be requested publicly. It's public information
Mm-hmm.
on some level. So if that's what your concern is, you might want to do that vetting and think through that more carefully before you start engaging that process. Maybe that's a conversation we need to have up front to figure out how we can structure things in a way so that you don't have to endure that. But make no mistake about it, there will come a time when someone's going to have to be personally accountable, even if they're not legally responsible. They've still got to be accountable to that thing. Does that make sense?
It makes good sense,
Yep.
actually. So Terry, under communicating could be a silent killer. Where do you see the biggest breakdowns during TPAs or other critical phases?
Well, we're going through one of these instances now where
Mm,
in these transactions, we're usually I always, here's my sports analogy for the day. I already gave you one Jordan reference. I'm gonna give you another one now. We're like the quarterbacks, right? So
mhm,
I play the role of quarterback, and you're like, you're shuffling the ball to all these different people, all these different entities, all these different parties. When any one part of that stops, breaks down, or in some way doesn't confer communication, then that means someone has a question.
mhm,
So we're going through an instance now where we're trying to move one of these transactions forward. And unfortunately, we have an instance where a member of our client's team is being either slow to respond or just not responding at all on things that are necessary to actually get a lender to say, we're good with this. Now you can go ahead and give this to the government.
right.
Well, we're stuck in the middle now because we have the other side of the ledger, seller and their team. They're asking questions about where is this and what's the holdup, because they've done these deals before. They have a sense of timing. And so we're in the precarious position of having to say, without saying it, we're waiting on our client. So
Mm,
it's really kind of the subtle push, pull, and nudge. And so the point that I'm getting at here, Evan, is when you have one party or any particular party that's just not engaging and
right.
just not having a conversation that needs to be had, it does slow down every single piece of the process. And
Mm,
look, I'm saying this in this context, but we've seen other instances where, for example, a lender, a bank, their team, they're not responding, or an instance where HUD or their team is not responding. It doesn't matter who is not responding. When the responses don't come forward and when they don't flow, it ultimately means that something is bogging down. And it doesn't matter if you're acquiring something like in a TPA or if you're building a new project from the ground up.
mm,
These sorts of transactions really, I mean, they're complex business deals. And that means that communication, over communication, actually matters more than not. And so one of the things that we talk about constantly in our firm is, we need to over communicate more times than not. I know it might sound simple, I know it might sound silly, but we need to over communicate. Sort of like, when I leave the house in the mornings, or if my wife and I happen to be in the same place, and I'm like, hey, let's run down this thing again. I have this, and this, and I'll be home at this time, or I've got this
mhm.
thing and I won't be home until X, Y, or Z. So can you
Right.
arrange all the other home stuff that needs to happen? And it's the same thing for her. And that might sound silly, but when that doesn't occur, invariably some link in that chain is going to be broken.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there specific points in the HUD process where credibility actually matters more than getting the technicals perfect?
Yeah, I think at all points, Evan. I think at every point in in the process, that credibility matters more than not. So when we're first engaged, for example, right, when we're engaged on a deal and we're engaged in a new process, one of the things that we're going to constantly ask is there anything we should know that we don't know?
Hmm.
In other words, we're asking, what are you not telling us? And
Right.
we ask that question multiple times because we're trying to get to a resolution in our own brains of is there anything lurking in the weeds that we need to be prepared to present up front? Because here's what I found that the bureaucrats that we deal with, and I don't say bureaucrats as a pejorative, I mean that in the sense these are the people who operate the bureaucracy. What I found is that when you are willing to engage with them and just say the thing as it is, they're more likely to give you some grace, to forbear a little bit. I'll give you another example. So we're processing a deal now where a client is trying to not only just acquire a property, but it has subsidized funding on it, something what's called most people know as Section 8, has a HAP contract on it.
Right.
And there were some, funky little permutations in terms of the current ownership and who has it and how they acquired it. And, our client is experienced, to my earlier point, but not experienced in the HUD program. And we could have easily gone to HUD and said, hey, our guy, his company's experienced and they're going to do X, Y, or Z, and they've done X, all of these sorts of things. We were very clear up front saying, hey, they've done this multifamily work before, but they've never done it in this context. And HUD said, well, we want them to hire an experienced management company. Well, that obviously means an expense. So we had to navigate that with HUD to, really come to some sort of resolution where they're going to hire a consultant that's experienced. They're going to give them some guidance and some training, but ultimately they will be able to make that handoff in a shorter amount of time than if we had just tried to sort of pull the wool over the government's eyes. I think that kind of candor, that kind of transparency, and that kind of just over communicating up front and early, that is what matters in all of these sorts of deals.
Hmm. So, for clients without a long track record, what's one credibility move they can make that doesn't require decades of experience, maybe just strategy?
I think number one, being very candid up front, as I've said before. And I think the other thing, which may sound, a little basic, but I think it's just hiring good help. And that's not
Mm,
it's not a plug for, for our firm. I'm just saying go get an experienced team of people, even if that's internal. Like if you know that you've never done this before, go
right.
find someone who has done it and then bring them on and let them sort of take your hand and guide you through the process. That speaks volumes of what someone ultimately will do and how successful they will be, even in the eyes of the government, because what they see is this is someone who's trying to get it right. So let's work with them.
Mm. So, Terry, credibility isn't just something that you talk about in the deals. It's what you build over your entire law firm and around something that you go deep into in your digital course. The niche practice for listeners who may not know, can you tell us a little bit about the niche practice and how does it help attorneys carve out their own path in a saturated legal world without relying on a big partner firm model?
So, okay, so I'll take you back to the dark ages of law school and just after law school
Take
for
us
me.
back to the beginning where it all
Is that
began.
yeah, take it, run it back and take it back, right? So I think you've heard me say this before. I was taught, as most attorneys, if you've gone to law school in the last 30 years, probably in the last 50 years, most of us are taught there is one path to success.
Mhm.
And that path is the only path to success. And that's probably not unique to law, probably not unique to lawyers. What I was, surprised to learn as I began my journey in law, I was just surprised to learn that there were people who were doing it in different ways. And that didn't always look the same. It didn't look like some fancy, building downtown in a city someplace where there were, 300 lawyers and there was this big corporate, behemoth behind you. I was fortunate to have multiple experiences in law school, which I've talked about before. But one of my formative experiences was working at a small law firm in Phoenix a couple of summers when I was in law school. They did a very specialized kind of law. It wasn't even remotely associated with what I'm doing now.
Wow.
What was so impressive to me about what they did was they did that thing, and they did that one thing well. They did a few other things like as a complement to it, but they did one primary thing, and they did that one primary thing well. And what I have been asked so many times over the course of my professional life is, how did you do this? And my response is always, pick something that you're passionate about, pick something that's true to who you are, and then build around that one thing. That's really the premise of the niche practice. And so
Wow.
the idea is to take people from beginning, whether you're just starting out or whether maybe you're looking for a career pivot, and you're figuring out what is your thing. For me, that thing was HUD. And for me, that thing was doing the transactions that we do every day here. There is something analogous to that in any facet, in any area of law. And what the course does is to demonstrate those things and how I built that, which then hopefully is transferable to how you can do the same thing in your way.
Mm. Terry, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you all for tuning in to Blueprint to Billions. If you're navigating HUD-backed development and want to elevate your credibility from day one, connect with Terry Bruner at terrybrunerlaw.com. And if you're an attorney looking to build a legal practice on your own terms, outside of a big firm pressure and into a niche that actually reflects your values, check out Terry's course at thenichepractice.com. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's ready to lead with clarity and not just credentials. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.